Today we got some more actual history about the end of the Civil War and the beginning of Reconstruction in Texas. This is the tragic story of Lem Murrell, who was one of the most prosperous citizens of Coryell County, Texas, at the time of the Civil War. Morel was said to have gold hidden on his property, and during the chaos that ensued after the Civil War ended, a group of outlaws would try to appropriate Morel's gold for themselves. We will be reading from this book, 70 Years in Texas, Memories of the Pioneer Days, Indian Depredations, and the Northwest Cattle Trail. This book was written by J.M. Franks of Gatesville, Texas, and published in 1924. J.M. Franks wrote this book to give the reader a brief account of the early happenings of Texas. In this episode, we will read Franks' account of the outlaws' attack on Lem Murrell's homestead in 1865. We will then read two other short accounts of this story, one from Vignettes of Coryell County by Claude and Mabel Bailey, published in 1976, and the other from Coryell County, Texas Families, 1854 to 1985. This was published in 1986 by the Coryell County Genealogical Society. So here is the tragic story of Lem Murrell and his family in 1865. Early days in Texas during the Civil War. In the fall of 1864, I went with a man by the name of John Knowles to eastern Texas, Smith County, 12 miles from Tyler to the Steen Salt Works to get salt. I was not 14 years old at this time, but I drove 5 yoke of oxen to a big old wooden oxen wagon with a big old tar bucket hung on the coupling pole to grease the wagon with. When we started back, we fell in with Julius and Billy Townsend, who also came there for salt. They lived in Lampasas County and were just about my age. We built a big fire at night and put a lot of sweet taters in to roast, and my, what a time we would have. The next spring, 1865, old Uncle Rice Knowles had a big train of wagons, and I was going to Eagle Pass on the Rio Grande to haul cotton. I hired on to drive one of the teams, 6 yoke of oxen, and he was to pay me $10 per month. My brother was to get $15 per month, while Jay Ennis, who was about my age, was to get $10 per month. Knowles had 5 big black men with him who had been run out of Louisiana to Texas the year before to keep the Yankees from getting them. Ben Knowles had 1 wagon, Jake Mills, Knowles' son-in-law, had another, while Jake Pruitt had 2 wagons. Sam Mills was driving a wagon for Dave Cox of Hamilton County, and John Ennis was driving a wagon for Ace Langford. In the train there were 14 wagons all told, 12 oxen to the wagon. 12 times 14 would make 168 oxen, a pretty good little herd. There must have been 50 or 60 old ox bulls in the outfits, and when the steers were hobbled and turned loose, I will tell you, there was plenty of rackets. We got to San Antonio, unloaded the cotton, went out near the head of the San Antonio River and camped, thinking we would start on soon to Eagle Pass. But in a few days the news came that Lee had surrendered to Grant. Then we knew that the war, that had been going on for 4 long years, and had cost the lives of thousands of the best and bravest men in the South, was about to end. So we never got to Eagle Pass at all, and about that time there was a band of men who claimed to be Southern soldiers, called themselves Shelley's men. They were taking everything that came in their way, and some things that did not come in their way. Oh, it was terrible times. Everything was in an uproar. I was just 14 then, and of course, I could not understand or realize just how bad it was, but I knew it was bad enough. I would go to town most every day. The people there were just milling around. The Shelley men would go into the stores, take whatever they wanted, go into the saloons, get whiskey, whoop and yell and just do anything they pleased. There were no officers, and if there had been, what could they have done? These same men, or I don't know that they were the same ones who were at San Antonio, but I understand that they called themselves Shelley men, or up in Coryell County. They went to Lem Murrell, shot him down in cold blood, and ransacked the house for money. I have been told that they received $100. They tried to get Mrs. Morel to tell them where the money was, but she never told them. Lem Murrell lived about 12 miles north of Gatesville, on the Leon River. He owned more slaves than any man in Coryell County, and had one of the best and finest places in the county. He had a wife and several children, all small at the time of his death. Mrs. Morel, before her marriage, was Miss Mary Bailey, a good Christian lady in any man's country. My old friend Bob Morel, one of the sons, was a few years ago still living in Coryell County, on the old place. Young Lem, or Dick as he was called, has been dead for a number of years. I don't know whether Albert is living or not. Mrs. Morel has been dead a long time. Lem Murrell was killed in cold blood, shot down like a dog. Some, I see, claim that these were Quantrill's men, but I do not know that they were. Neither do I know whether they were Shelley's men, but I do know they claim to be. But this was an exception and not a rule, as most of the boys that were discharged came home, went to work, and made good citizens, and I for one just love the old exes. They are all getting old and soon will cross the great divide to that land from whose bounds no travelers ever returns. They fought 4 long years for a principle they thought right, and I am not going to say that they were not right. We were in San Antonio about the month of July in 1865. We loaded up the wagons with rawhides and started for Port Lavaca on the coast, and I will say that part of the men had gone back home. 2 of the black men ran away as soon as they found out that they were free. The others were sent home from San Antonio by Mr. Knowles. Yes, that awful war was over, but I never got home until the next May of 1866. When we arrived at Port Lavaca, the Yanks had just begun to land at Powder Horn. There was a little short railroad from Port Lavaca to Victoria, but this was torn up during the war, and the Federals soon started work to rebuild this road again. They made the black soldiers chop cross ties down in the Guadalupe bottom. We camped about 6 miles out of Victoria, and hauled cross ties out of the bottom for this little railroad. So you see I have helped build a railroad in Texas, but I did not like the looks of the blue-coated fellows very much. I could see them marching for miles on the road. So that is the account of Lem Murrell's death from J.M. Frank's 1924 book, 70 Years in Texas. Here is the story from Vignettes of Coryell County by Claude and Mabel Bailey, published in 1976. The Morel Treasure. Of all the legends and tales about buried treasure, the one that interests me most is the one concerning the Lemuel Morel fortune. I have heard his son, Uncle Bob Morel, tell about the murder of his father by masked robbers. Bob was about 8 years old when he witnessed this tragedy. Mr. Morel was born in 1820. In 1846 he came to Texas. He later settled in Coryell County on the Leon River, about 12 miles west of what is now Gatesville, where he had a homestead. He built a home, slave quarters, and a trading post. All 5 of his children, 3 boys and 2 girls, were born in that home. All the staples and other merchandise were brought in by wagon train from Houston, the wagons being drawn by oxen. Several cowboys rode with the wagon train to protect the drivers and cargo from the Indians. Mr. Morel was a cattleman and had large herds of cattle. He was prosperous and reputed to have a vast fortune of hidden gold. On the evening of the murder, he left the house to go to the spring near the trading post. He left the house without taking his gun, something he had not done before. This was during the Reconstruction period following the Civil War, and the carpetbaggers were causing much disturbance. 2 bands of outlaws, the Shelleys and the Quantrills, were known to have made Coryell County their hiding place. Late in the evening on the day of the murder, August 4th, 1865, a group of masked men rode up to the Morel place. They demanded some money and that Morel reveal the hiding place of the treasure. He gave them $100 and told them that was all he had, but they did not believe him. As he turned to go to the house to get his gun, they shot him in the back and killed him. After the outlaws killed them, they threatened to kill the 6-month-old baby girl Ora by throwing her in the oven of a hot stove unless Mrs. Morel told them where the gold was hidden. Some of the slaves were standing around crying and begging her to give them the gold to save the baby. She finally convinced the men that she knew nothing about the gold, and they left. The murderers were never apprehended. Mrs. Morel was Mrs. Beatty before her marriage, a good Christian lady in any man's country. The baby grew to adulthood and married Vinnie Miller. They lived in Gatesville for a while, and then moved to Cisco where they lived the remainder of their lives. J.M. Franks relates that at the time of Mr. Morel's death, Mr. Morel had accomplished a great deal for a man of 45 years. He had one of the finest places in the county. He was a good citizen killed in cold blood, shot down like a dog. Besides leaving a large estate on which some of his children lived the remainder of their lives, he had his slaves build a log school house. Thus he established the first rural school in the county at Ater, which carried the Morel name until it was consolidated with other schools in recent years. And this is the story from the book Coryell County, Texas Families, 1854 to 1985, published in 1986. The story of Lemuel Morel is a microcosm of the history and spirit of the American West, which has permeated the attitudes and thoughts of the American mind, and made itself a part of the American character. The events in Mr. Morel's life reflect the consistent striving for a better existence, the self-sufficiency necessary for achieving this goal, the importance of family as the basic unit through which to achieve the good life, and then the tragedy that often befalls people in their objective, indeed a reflection of the American story. Lemuel Morel had been born in Alabama on August 4, 1820, whereas Mary Beatty was born in Missouri on October 8, 1834. They homesteaded on the Leon River in Coryell County, Central Texas. Lemuel selected the site because of the availability of water and the richness of the soil. After surveying their land, hard work began. Lemuel and Mary built a log house with 3 fireplaces for themselves, using the wattle and daub style of the many houses in early America. It was reputed to have been warm and cozy. He and his slaves built log cabins for the slaves and their families. Lemuel, a productive individual, was a cattleman, a farmer, a surveyor, and a merchant. His general store or trading post was supplied by his sending teams of men and oxen to the port city of Galveston to pick up products for the people of Coryell County. He taught his slaves and neighbors farming and irrigation methods. He specialized his slaves in various skills and tasks in order to make his settlement a self-sufficient community. It is said that Lemuel would not wear patches on the seat of his pants because they implied laziness, whereas patches on the front of the pants were acceptable, suggesting industry and hard work. Community-minded, Lemuel saw the need for a school in the area. He gave the land on which the Morel School was built at Ater, Texas. Some of his own children were educated in the school. The Morel children were Lemuel, born in 1856, Robert, born in 1858, Josie, born in 1861, Albert, born in 1864, and Ora, born in 1865. On this land, a cemetery was also established. Many of Lemuel's and Mary's descendants, including 4 of their children, are buried there. With success came the rumor that Lemuel and Mary Morel had acquired large amounts of money. Exactly 2 months after the end of the Civil War, a restless time in our nation's history, a band of robbers rode up to the Morel house. Upon entering, they threatened to throw the baby Ora into the fire unless Mrs. Morel gave them the money. Slaves who were cooking in the room pleaded with the outlaws to spare the child. They complied but hid out in the blacksmith shop to watch for Lemuel's return to the house. Having gone out for the first time without his gun, and not knowing of the ominous danger that awaited him, Lemuel crossed the river returning home. As he did, the robbers shot him. One account holds that, apparently kind to his slaves, Lemuel Morel was buried on his property with 2 of his best helpers. This has not been proven, however. The 2 others buried next to him could be his in-laws. For years after the event of June 9, 1865, Mary and her children would be awakened at night by the sounds of people who were digging for the Morel treasure. In some cases, the family would find holes big enough to hold a horse. The story of America is filled with rewarding struggles, with intense ambition, with disappointments, all of which are laced with tragedy and enduring perseverance. This, too, is the story of Lemuel Morel. So that's it for this episode about the unfortunate death of Lemuel Morel in June of 1865. This story is interesting because it seems to indicate the lawlessness of that time, and the storyline does not necessarily fit common narratives about that time period. We have also done some other videos about stories from J.M. Frank's book, 70 Years in Texas, about Indian attacks in Coryell and surrounding counties, so be sure to check those videos out. We also did another video on the life of Redding Wood Black, who was a Unionist in Uvalde, Texas during the Civil War, and he was also the victim of a violent attack in the Reconstruction period, although under different circumstances. This channel is called Unworthy History because we cover actual history that is now deemed unworthy to be shown on so-called history channels on TV. If you'd like to support the mission of Unworthy History, then consider joining our Patreon page or becoming a YouTube channel member. Your contribution will be recognized at the end of each episode, and you will also have access to members-only videos. In the coming weeks on Unworthy History, we will be posting another members-only video about the Minnesota Sioux outbreak of 1862.
So if you want to see more episodes like this, then be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time on Unworthy History.